Okay, this is week 4, day 2, and we're talking about identifiers. What are identifiers? And we're going to be using this word. An identifier is just simply the name of an object. So if you think about, you have two of your friends sitting at a table, and you want to borrow a cell phone from a certain one of them. When you approach the table, you identify the person that you want to borrow the cell phone from by calling out their name. So you might say, Sally, can I borrow your cell phone? And so you have used her name because her name is what identifies her and distinguishes her from the person sitting next to her, who might be Katie or something like that. So an identifier simply is just the name of an object. The last word, for instance, this is just an example, in a class header is the name of the class, which we've already talked about. So the last word in a class header is really its identifier. It's just another word, it's a synonym for the word name. Now, here's examples. Public class my pets. So my pets is an identifier. And then public class tax calculation. Well, the identifier is tax calculation because that's the name of the class and the name of the file, by the way. Besides classes, we will be giving names or identifiers to variables and methods and scanner objects and even other things throughout the semester. So each of those objects are going to have names. They're going to have identifiers, and so that's a term that we will use. Now we're going to talk about generally any identifier right now, not just class or variable. There are different ways to name those things, but we are going to talk about, in general, legal and illegal identifiers or names of objects in Java. And so an illegal identifier becomes a syntax error. The compiler catches it, and then you have to go fix it before you can run the program. Well, so what would be wrong with an identifier? Well, what's right with an identifier? Legal identifiers contain the following things. You have letters of the alphabet is one thing. It's going to be obviously the most common. You also can include numbers in an identifier or the name of an object. You can have underscores and dollar signs. So just remember those four things, and you'll be good. Those four things are the different. Those are the characters that can be in legal identifiers. One thing to remember, even though it's not mentioned, people try to do this anyways, is you can't put a space in an identifier. So if you have two words like first game, you can't go first space game. The space would be illegal and cause a syntax error. Legal identifiers also cannot begin with numbers. Now you can have numbers in there, it's just you can't start the identifier with a number. So you can say game 3, but you can't say third game. You can't use that as an identifier because it starts with a number. Legal identifiers cannot be, but they may contain the following. So a Java reserved word. Well, what's a Java reserved word? A Java reserved word are words like, if we go to our JGrasp, words that are specific to Java that the compiler knows that it has a special meaning. So for instance, public, that is a special word. Class is one. Static and void, these purple words are all are special words, and you can't use them as an identifier. Even system capitalized is going to be a problem, and things like that. Now, some of these you're not going to use anyway because they're not going to make sense. But there are plenty of other reserved words, which will show a list in a second, that you can't use. So these special words can't be used. Now, notice public is a special word if it's not capitalized. Capitalized, it's not a big deal. Capitalized class is not a special word, but the lowercase class is a special Java word, and you can't name a class as class or public. So if we continue here, okay, other words that you can't use for names. It would be true or false or null. And you'll see later on in other chapters why we cannot use those as identifiers or names of objects. So here's an example. True is an illegal identifier, but if you said true stories, it's legal. So as we said up here, identifiers cannot be these things, but they can contain these words. And so another example, public with a small p is illegal. But if you said public 5, well, that's legal because 5 is a legal character. And so public is not just the name of it, it's part of the name, which is okay. And so here's a bunch of words that are reserved, special words that have special meaning to the compiler. So we're going to be using a number of these words throughout the semester in their proper usage, but they can't be used for identifiers. So if we go to the next one, illegal identifier. So it might be good for you to pause this and see if you can figure out what makes each one of these illegal. So hopefully you did it yourself first. And so basically the inventory item has a space in between. That's illegal. Class is a reserved word, special word. 2012 budget starts with a number, which you cannot do. That's the illegal identifier. And then the number symbol. Only the underscore and the dollar sign are the only symbols that can be used in an identifier. So that is that's what makes those 4 things illegal. All right, we go on to the next thing. Now, with class identifiers, class identifiers are named in a special way. Now, they have to be legal. It has to fit all the legal. So it has to be, it can have letters of the alphabet, numbers, and those symbols, and no spaces, but there's a conventional or a normal way that most programmers name their classes. And so that's what we're going to do in our class. Although you can use any legal identifier to name a class. In other words, you could name it anything that's legal and the compiler will not care. However, there's a conventional way to name a class that distinguishes it from being the name of a variable or some other Java object. And that's the advantage, is that when you see it named a certain way, you go, oh, well, that is the name of a class. Oh, this is the name of a variable. And so you can tell by how they're named, that by the conventional method in which they're named, what they refer to. And so conventional method for class identifiers. Besides being legal, it's got to begin with a capital letter. So what we're going to do is all class identifiers or names must begin with a capital letter. Again, the compiler won't care, but we will, because we want it to follow conventional methods. It has to begin with a capital letter, and if you have more than one word in the identifier, then you start each word with a capital letter. And so if you see down here with an example, here's music writer. So 2 words together, no space in between. You capitalize music, capitalize writer. This is called upper camel casing because you start high, go low, high, and then low, like the back of a camel. And so the other examples that we have here, here's just a single word. It starts with a capital letter. Here's 2 words. So they're both capitalized, and we threw in a number because number makes it legal in the class identifier as long as it doesn't start it. So these are the 2 things you've got to remember if you're naming a class. It's got to start with a capital letter, and you've got to start each word with a capital letter if you have multiple words. So here's some legal identifiers, but this is not how we would name classes. So I would pause the video and see if you can figure out what makes these not conventional class names. So hopefully you already did this so that you can check your answers here. So the first one, you have undergrad student. So G could be capitalized and S could be capitalized. to make this a conventional class identifier. The next one, I is capitalized in both of the words, but you have an underscore in between. That's not conventional. That's used for other types of things. The next one has all caps for budget, and that is not conventional for a class. It is for something else, but not for a class. It's legal, but it's used for something else. And then here you have budget 2012, but it doesn't start with a capital letter. That is not a conventional class name, even though it's legal. All right. We're going to stop here. In the next video, we'll deal with comments.